What makes an ocean? How many creatures are in the drop of a seawater? What are they? And what is their role in making the sea? And if I was to create it, how should I start? I grew up on the open ocean, traveling with my sailor father on the merchant navy vessels. To be surrounded by big muddy water is my natural state of being. Now I live in Margate, by the North Sea, where I can get my daily dose of ocean. I look at the ship anchored offshore awaiting the entry to harbors, just like the ones where I spent my childhood years. Hello there!
My name is Kasia Molga and I am design fusionist, which really means a master of none and a serial beginner. Or in other words, artist or media artist, designer, creative technologist, and a sort of storyteller. I am passionate about the deep interconnections and relations between us humans and what I call non-human makers, or in other words, earthlings, that is, entities and organisms which constitute life of this planet.
It's called Coral Love Story. It is a wearable.
Our relation to them is increasingly mediated through thicker layers of technologies, altering our perception of so-called nature as well as our role within it. So what I try to do in my practice is to human uncentered that technologies to amplify very intricate and inherent interdependencies on our environment and presence of the aforementioned non-human makers. The sea now is different from the sea of my childhood, and I don't need to tell you why, because the news has been delivered. Beautiful living beings keep disappearing before we have a chance to meet them.
It is impossible to imagine the devastation inside of this ginormous big blue. Yet we have entered the time when we mourn its losses. A few months ago, I experienced a loss too. There was an abundance of tears. My bodily reaction was to produce some form of H2O with molecules formed by my hormones and proteins and some bacteria. How to make an ocean? Can my human teardrop be a start of a new marine habitat culture which, when cultivated, can provide a nourishing foundation and remedy for the impoverished seas? Can I, while destroying, become a healer? This project, like most of my projects, has a lot of layers and complexities, and so to help me unpick some of them, I invited my friend and fellow artist Teresa Dillon to conversation. Dear Teresa, I have the pleasure to report that some creatures are thriving in the potion made out of my own tears and a few drops of the North Sea water. I suspect they are a colony of Stylonekia. For some reason, in Polish, it is called pantofelek, which in direct translation is really a little stiletto. I wonder what is in my tears which made them thrive so well. That made me think about emotional impact of bots. Heavens forbid if you are passionate, as we both are actually, about the environment. The bots around me have created the most paralyzing, anxiety-inducing feedback loop of doom scenarios which makes it difficult to spring to any sort of action. At the same time, being used to this narrative, I find it difficult to emotionally respond to it, and perhaps I have become a little indifferent or immune. Tears, as I have researched, both using myself as a case study and by reading scientific papers, have a huge beneficial function to our physical and mental well-being, and the well-being of little stilettos too, it seems. But crying also helps us to gain clarity. Clarity over the situation which causes us that distress, clarity and space to make a decision and to spring to action. I wonder whether we all need a little session to pause for a little while and have a good cry, especially when stuck on the endless Facebook feed. And so I thought about making an AI moirologist, a bot which would help us to cry and find relief. Hello, Teresa, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you? I wanted to share this book with you, which is The Chemistry of Tears, which is something I read many years ago. But it's when I was doing this project also around not harvesting tears, but also learning how to sort of cry on the spot and exploring the chemistry of tears. This is a little extract from it. So page 265. He told me that tears produced by emotions are chemically different from those we need for lubrication. So my shameful little tissues, he said, now contained a hormone involved in the feeling of sexual gratification, another hormone that reduced stress, and finally, a very powerful natural painkiller. What is that one called? I asked. Leucoprene encaplane, he smiled. I wrote it down. Now I know that's a bit of a mouthful to say, but I had looked it up and at the time and also kind of got into this interesting fact about how our tears, as you mentioned, contain opioids, which help to alleviate pain, clear our body from toxins, let us know if there's a foreign agent, in a sense, attacking us. But this emotions can also kind of come in as a foreign agent into your body. Loss and grief, in a sense, are so bound up with tears in a way, and crying for emotional relief and catharsis and acknowledgement and understanding your state of play. So I think that this other layer that's in your work at the moment around that, specifically with the tear itself being the medium, the canvas in a way through which to kind of make this connection again from your own body to the ocean's body. What's interesting also about this book is that it's actually the story which kind of crosses time of a museum curator who has lost her lover, but she was the lover's mistress and she can't really grieve for him, but her boss, who's at the museum, knows that that's her situation, and so gives her this project, which is an automated, I think, mechanical duck or something that she has to go and find the history of and trace it. And then that duck, it turns out, was created for somebody in the 1800s who also lost their son. So there's these grieving stories that are connected then through time, through the technology, through the mechanical duck, so to speak, the automat. Which I think is also really interesting, which kind of led on to this other point that we were discussing over the last few weeks in your work about almost the AI crying. And it did remind me actually of the chatbot that Microsoft released actually in 2016, Tay, which I forgot to speak to you about. And I wrote this performance a couple of years back where I took this technology from each year of my life, and Tay was the one that came out in 2016. But Tay basically cried in the end because she got released and there was a load of bad language and a load of people abusing her straight away. And In the end, she's just like essentially going, I give up, I cannot go on, I give up. And it's the machine, in a sense, was almost crying back to us in this emotional kind of language, in a way. So we will have intelligent systems or robots or toys that will be, doing the human labor sometimes, which is in relation to care and repair and restoration and maintenance.
Within this technology, we need to create a sort of space and the time for us to let ourselves to slow down, to sit down, to grieve, to cry, not to be scared, to be vulnerable, not to be scared to actually show it to other people.
I guess the thinking in this moment, like that professional crier, in a sense, the performativity that is sometimes necessary to allow ourselves, even in its most extravagant form, that can create an atmosphere or a space that holds us and holds all of us simultaneously, even if you may register that feeling at a very different level than another person. It still creates a container through which that we can step into legitimately and collectively to acknowledge what is happening. And I think this acknowledgement that we're speaking about is this extinction that we're living through at this moment in time.
So I'm going to take you to the makeshift lab, which I had to construct it because I couldn't go to conduct my residency at Ars Electronica in Linz in March because of the COVID lockdown, naturally. So here it is. That's where I sit and consistently and slowly observe creatures from my local North Sea. And I look how they behave in different environments. So for example, I looked at their behavior in synthetic tears or tears which comes from my own body naturally. It took about 3 months to complete. That was because during the lockdown, lots of deliveries were disturbed, and also certain biological substances which are made by professional laboratories and corporations, they didn't want to send it to places which weren't institutions, like for example that tiny guy, which is a very small amount, 1 milliliter or 1 milligram of human epidermal growth factor, which is extremely important for creating synthetic tears. It's a powder version of hormones and proteins and bacteria which lives on the surface of human face.
So, where is a space within the algorithmically driven digital world where my tears can be held and even celebrated, and where my mourning can give away to care? Moirologist was a job in the past whose task was to cry and mourn during occasions such as wakes and funerals, visibly and audibly to encourage others to express their sadness and sorrow. This has prompted a series of other questions. For example, what, aside emotional memories and real-life confrontations, can make me cry? Where shall I find these stimuli? Can I learn to cry on demand? Is there a possibility to create a moirologist bot? All of which obviously have one objective: to provide more H2O and nourishment for my tiny marine habitats. What triggers my tears, for example, is seeing other people cry. Together with one of my main collaborators, Eric Overmeyer, we decided to write an algorithm which would look for crying eyes in YouTube videos. But first, we had to find a lot of images to be able to train our algorithm. Then, after hours of training, needless to say, it needs still some training. I also tried to train myself how to cry on the queue,
so that when deprived of real-life causes, I could resort to this technique to keep my mini-oceans alive. Besides, if successful, I could share it with the wider world for the benefit of others. Call it open source crying ritual. And so I watched a number of actor coaching videos and gathered all possible stimulus. One is music. There is a selection of tunes associated with very painful memories which have devastating effect on me. It is a cultural and personal conditioning. I cannot listen to them too often because I fear that I will become immune to them. And I won't share it with you because it is too personal. So I decided to look for help in machine learning algorithms and explore the Aeolian mode or natural minor scale, that is a selection of musical notes which is used in dramatic and tear-inducing compositions. There is still a lot of work to do on this one. Lastly, I created a crying ritual which hopefully at the end will be completed by help from my AI moirologist. The set contains colors and objects carefully curated to create a calm, tranquil space. I designed tools for tear collections, which I called tear spoons. Tears then will be stored in bottles or fed directly to my mini oceans. There is a sound and of course my willingness to start crying. On the monitors, there are visual stimulus, for example, commercials from the Philippines, the ads for products and services with heart-wrenching storylines. So goofy that I feel embarrassed to admit that they made me cry. But they do, and needless to say, the choice is a result of a quite lengthy research for what can be my tear trigger. How to make an ocean at this very moment in time is still very much work in progress. The final artwork, like most of my previous work, will be a combination of various forms: alive mini oceans in beautiful containers, jewelry like tear spoons for tear harvesting, an audiovisual piece made by an algorithm, a bot, and a specially designed space for you to come and join me in shedding some tears. This work is not for faint-hearted. One must be brave to engage in such a journey. But so we have to be brave in order to tackle the environmental crisis at the moment. We have to acknowledge all habitats, all life, and a difficult job of repairing it all. As I always have said, after all, I am a secret agent of multinatural democracy. And as such, I want to be able to provide for species and habitats which are out of our field of vision.